so we can get this party started. Hello, YouTube. Good morning. Welcome to Lurie Daniel Favorite Show Experience, where we here at Urban View, Channel 126, invite you to join us as we talk about the things that we need to talk about. And it's a lot of news that we got to get to today. A lot of fugaziness happening right now. I don't know if you all are aware of this, but there's this thing called projection, right, where you know you wrong. You know you're wrong, but you want us to think that it's the other people who are wrong. And so when you're projecting, you indicate that the other person has done a thing. You talk about the other person doing a thing, and you try to front like they're the ones who are the problem. But it's projection because you're really the one with the problem. You are the problem. And so we have a lot of projection happening in the government right now, a lot of projection happening in these United States. And it's taken on an international nature that we need to be aware of and think about, because it's got implications, not just for who we are in these United States, but for how we're going to be able to move about the world. And that really, really matters. Whether you planning on staying here or peacing out, it matters. It matters a lot. So I want to explore some of these topics a bit, because I think it's important that we're clear about what's happening, and that we often talk about stories, but we don't necessarily come back to them to update them. We got some updates today. Shout out to Kilmar Abrego Garcia. I'm just going to say that, sir, you done been through a whole lot of things. We're going to talk about your story in just a little bit, but he's not the only one. You guys may recall, well, let me just give you a little background there. You may recall that Kilmar Abrego Garcia was the gentleman, the Latino person. Oh, and there's something happening. I'm streaming from home today, so y'all gonna hear, I don't know, we hardly ever have this happen during the show, but here we are. I'm streaming from home, so y'all gonna hear that noise in the background. But Kilmar Abrego Garcia, as you may recall, was the gentleman, Latino gentleman, who was picked up minding his own business. He was here, he's got a family here, and he was picked up by ICE, and he was one of the first people that we found out who was being, they called it deporting, but he was being sent to a country that he wasn't from. And he wasn't the only one. There were other people who were being sent to the countries that they were from, but they had fled those countries because they had been seeking asylum. So it was a real mess. And his name was one of the first names that we learned about that had been experiencing this sort of thing. So we're going to talk about that, because he has been through hell and back. And today he's out. He's out of incarceration. He's out of detention. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we do any of that, I want to share with you something that happened yesterday. In the House of Congress, they have hearings. That's one of the main things that congressional representatives do. They have hearings where they explore things, they promote, or they submit legislation, and they try to get legislation passed into law. But we had a hearing yesterday that really showed us just how much projection is actually happening. Now, before I get to what happened in the hearing, I want to share with you something that took place back in 2021? This was 2021. In 2021, top law enforcement officials told us that the biggest domestic terrorist threat came from white supremacists. Now, this wasn't the first time we had heard this. Going back into, 2006, 2007, 8, 9, we got a report from the Department of Homeland Security that talked about the fact that the greatest threat to this nation was white nationalists. We learned that white nationalists were using the military, they were using police precincts, they were using the National Guard as training, because they didn't want to just be white nationalists in thought, they wanted to be white nationalists in deed. And so they were looking at the military, the police departments, whatever training they could get in terms of militarized operations and formations. They were looking to join these institutions because they wanted to be able to use the training, the military training there, to basically go into the race war. And a lot of people tried to act like, well, that report had to be rescinded in the 2006s, and we weren't really sure about it. It only had to be rescinded because the white nationalists who had been elected to represent the white nationalists in office were like, we can't have this report out. And so we were crystal clear. And this wasn't no surprise for us, baby. We've been new. This was you trying to fool you. I might have been born at night. That's something I always like to say. I was not, however, born last night. And so when we think about what was happening back in 2021, all the way going back to 2006, we're all pretty clear that this government has been racist and has been protecting racists. And we know that racism, white nationalism, is, again, the biggest domestic terrorist threat to the nation. Now, you might be thinking I'm being extra about this. I thought you might, because I do occasionally get accused of being hyperbolic. And so, as I always say, you might say I'm being hyperbolic, but baby, I be right. I want you all to take a listen to this clip. This is Merrick Garland. Not a huge fan of Merrick Garland, but in this particular moment, he and Representative Alejandro Mayorkas, who you're also going to see in this video, were testifying before Congress about this very thing, about the greatest threat, domestic terrorist threat, to these United States. I'm going to share my screen because I believe in receipts, and I want you all to see this. This is from an article, again, out of the New York Times. And the article is called Top Law Enforcement Officials Say the Biggest Domestic Terror Threat Comes from White Supremacists. We are reminded, well, I'll remind you about the report that they pulled in just a bit ago. But Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas at that time told the senators, quote, the department is taking a new approach to addressing domestic terrorism, both internally and externally. And now I want you all to take a listen to this clip. Amina, we have it ready? All right, y'all, here we go. Let's take a look.
Domestic violent extremism and domestic terrorism has long been a core part of the Justice Department's mission. Immediately upon its founding, more than 150 years ago, the department pursued white supremacists who had sought to deny newly freed slaves their rights under the Constitution, including the right to vote. Unfortunately, the horror of domestic violent extremism is still with us. Indeed, the FBI assessed that 2019 was the deadliest year for violent domestic extremism since 1995. In March of this year, the intelligence community, in a report drafted by DHS, the FBI, and the National Counterterrorism Center, under the auspices of the Director of National Intelligence, assessed that domestic violent extremists pose an elevated threat in 2021. And in the FBI's view, the top domestic violent extremist threat we face comes from racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, specifically those who advocate for the superiority of the white race.
The terrorism-related threats we face as a nation have significantly evolved since the department's creation in the wake of the September 11th terrorist attacks. The threat landscape is now more complex, more dynamic, and more diversified. Today, racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists are the most likely to conduct mass casualty attacks against civilians, and anti-government or anti-authority violent extremists, specifically militia violent extremists, are the most likely to target law enforcement, government personnel, and government facilities. The threats posed by domestic violent extremism are often fueled by false narratives, conspiracy theories, and extremist rhetoric spread throughout social media and other online platforms.
Now, that to me, that feels pretty clear. Like they said that white nationalists are the most likely to engage in mass casualty attacks. The domestic terrorists that they're talking about, the greatest threat comes from those who are promoting the superiority of the white race. That seems very clear. It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of wiggle room there. That seems clear. And they said, again, specifically, those who advocate for the superiority of the white race are the most they're the most motivated domestic extremists. Now, this is important because you may recall that earlier this year, the Department of Homeland Security pulled a report down from its website that looked at the past. It was, I believe, a 5-year look back period. And when you look back over the past 5 years, what you saw was that to a number, the greatest threats came from mass casualty events came from right-wing domestic extremists. Right-wing domestic extremists also happen to be the white nationalist domestic extremists. And so you would have thought that if you had a report at the Homeland Security page, on the FBI page, that looked at the fact that if you are going to be examining these sorts of violent incidences, and you would look at the data rationally, what the data said was that if you were looking at who was causing the greatest harm, whose threats were resulting in deaths, it was the right wing. They pulled that report. We did a whole episode on this, so I'm not even going to repeat all of that, but go back in the archives. You can look at the episode. But Merrick Garland said, if there has to be a hard hierarchy of things that we prioritize, the January 6th attack would be at the top because it most threatens democracy. He said, quote, I have not seen a more dangerous threat to democracy than the invasion of the Capitol, calling it an attempt to interfere with the fundamental element of our democracy, a peaceful transfer of power. However, yesterday, when one of the FBI leads was testifying before Congress, they did not have that as a part of their commentary at all. What they had yesterday was a whole bunch of nonsense about Antifa. Now, interestingly, what I have learned since is that the commentary that they gave at this hearing was very different than what they had written in the testimony. Because when you're going to testify, usually you have to submit written testimony to accompany your oral argument so that the people who you are testifying in front of have a record that they can look to. Your written testimony and your oral arguments, or your oral testimony, is going to be entered into the record, but you got to also have the written testimony. There was some significant differences here. That's not really the purpose of the conversation today. I want you all to take a listen to this clip from the hearing that took place yesterday. Now, in 2021, we were clear. The greatest domestic terrorist threat was white nationalists. And out of all the threats that the country faced, the white nationalists sat at the top. Now, I want you to take a listen to this clip and this exchange between the one of the FBI directors and Benny Thompson, a representative who basically was doing God's work yesterday. Take a listen.
Any domestic terrorist organization that poses a threat to the homeland as we speak.
I'd say the first one, President Trump had just announced executive order domestic terrorist organization, ANTIFA. That's our primary concern right now.
Antifa.
All right, that's what President Trump did. What does the FBI say?
Right.
We share the same view. When you look at the data right now, you look at the domestic terrorist threat that we're facing, right now, what I see from my position is that's the most immediate violent threat that we're facing on the domestic side.
So where is Antifa headquartered?
What we're doing right now with the organization.
Where in the United States does Antifa exist?
Where they at?
If it's a terrorist organization, and you've identified it as number one.
We are building out the infrastructure right now.
Oh,
So what does that mean?
yeah.
We trying to get the information. You say Antifa is a terrorist organization. Tell us as a committee, how did you come to that? Where do they exist? How many members do they have in the United States as of right now?
Well, that's very fluid. It's ongoing for us to understand that. The same, no different than Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
No, I don't want you. I'll ask one question, sir. I just want you to tell us. If you said Antifa is the number one domestic terrorist organization operating in the United States, I just need to know where they are, how many people. I don't want a name. I don't want anything like that. Just how many people have you identified with the FBI that Antifa is made of?
Well, the investigations are active.
Sir, you wouldn't come to this committee and say something you can't prove. I know. I know you wouldn't do that. But you did.
Woo! You don't want no elder from our community looking at you and saying something like that. I know you didn't come up in here with all that foolishness. But you did. And that's basically how the committee hearing continued to go on. These are lying liars who lie all the damn time. But I want to clear the record, right? I want to make sure that we're clear about what we're talking about. So when I need a definition for something, I don't just guess about it, right? Like I told y'all yesterday, if you really want to know if Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett is getting money from a particular agency or entity, you can look that up. That's noble information. You ain't got to spread rumors about the sister online. There was this brother yesterday, shout out to Conscious Lee. He does a lot of good work, but he did this whole video about how people in Texas really care about Israel. They really care about, Palestine, and they did encampments. They did all this stuff. And so Jasmine Crockett is going to have to explain some things if she's clear about wanting to run for Senate, because in Texas, they really care. Like most of the high school students in Texas, he said, they stay in Texas and they take over campuses and they really, really care about Palestine. So she got some explaining to do. And I'm like, wait a minute. You talking about Jasmine Crockett y'all care so much in Texas about Israel and Palestine and what's happening in Gaza that both of your current senators might as well be members of the IDF. Like, you expect us to believe that's the make or break issue when Texas can't manage its electric grid. Y'all can't stop people from freezing in the winter. As soon as it rains too hard, you got people dying by the hundreds, and you can't do none of that stuff. But y'all care so much about Israel, and it's such a major issue. Not the issues on the ground, but it's such a major issue. Like, these are knowable things. Now y'all having Jasmine Crockett having to defend something that she don't even get. Having to defend something that she don't even participate in. But that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. When I want to know a thing, I look it up. Just like I showed y'all how to look up open secrets yesterday, opensecrets.org, where you can find out who's giving money to which candidate. I decided that I wanted to be clear about what fascism meant. So I went to the dictionary. The dictionary is a good source. It's a good source. So when I go to the dictionary, and here we are looking at Merriam-Webster.com, fascism is defined as a populist political philosophy, movement, or regime, such as that of the fascisti, I'm sure I pronounced that incorrectly, that exalts nation and often race above the individual, that is associated with a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, and that is characterized by severe economic and social regimentation and by forcible suppression of opposition. Now, if I wanted to get a little more into the definition of fascism, I might look at the thesaurus because I want to get some synonyms, right? Synonyms for fascism, just so I'm clear. And the dictionary allows you to do that. The dictionary gives you definitions. The thesaurus gives you synonyms. And another word for fascism is tyranny, right? Rule or control or leadership by one person with absolute power. So we're clear about what fascism is. Now, when I look up the definition of anti-fascist, when you put anti in front of a thing, that means you are against that thing. So I am against rule or leadership by one person with absolute power because I am against fascism. And I want us to be clear about that because the federal government seems to be very, very confused. And so when we're clear about things, we can make better decisions. One of the things that the state of Indiana got very clear about, moving on to that story, is that what they're not going to do is this redistricting situation with y'all's president. Indiana said, we're not doing redistricting with y'all. And which was crazy because Indiana, as you may recall, is one of the many Republican states that was getting pressured by Donald Trump to do a mid-cycle redistricting where they would redraw their maps to try to squeeze out even more of the Democrats from power. And Indiana was like, we're not doing this. They absolutely said no. And it surprised everybody because these people have been getting swatted. They've been getting doxxed. Donald Trump has basically talked about them on his fake-ass social media campaign, Truth Lion. I know we call it Truth Social, but I want you all to take a listen. This is Indiana. Actually, I'm not going to be able to play this right now because we don't have time. I just looked at the clock. But in the podcast, you were going to hear Indiana State Senator Greg Walker, who talks about the fact that Republicans that are giving into the White House's redistricting intimidation are normalizing the extreme divide in politics. It's a really profound statement because it's coming from a Republican who plans on continuing to run for office. And the Republicans, by an overwhelming majority, rejected the effort that Donald Trump was trying to ram down their throat to forcibly engage in mid-cycle redistricting. Pete Buttigieg had something to say about this on Chris Hayes' show. I'm not necessarily watching Chris Hayes' show, but I thought this conversation that I saw in this clip between Pete Buttigieg and Chris Hayes was worth listening. I want you all to take a listen to this clip. Because here we see the tide might be turning a little bit. And that's really going to matter in light of what's happening internationally with the International Criminal Court, which we're going to talk about in just a second. Take a listen to this clip. This is Pete Buttigieg in conversation with Chris Hayes on MSN Now.
I don't know.
Go ahead. You got it, Amina.
Politics that well. I really don't. It's not. There are states that I've had occasion to kind of cover in depth, and Indiana's not one of them. So I'm looking at this from the outside and thinking, wow, I did not see this coming. Now, there was resistance all along, and they were getting cajoled. What's your read on why this happened today?
It's absolutely extraordinary. The vice president said they have to pick a side, and they did. Now, to be clear, they didn't stop being Republicans. This is a conservative state. These are conservative legislators, but they figured out that the right thing to do, and for them, the smart thing to do, was to say no to the White House, no to Donald Trump, and no to J.D. Vance. And having spent a fair amount of time around the Indiana legislature, I got to tell you just how intense this pressure might have been. These are not full-time legislators. At least the last time I checked, they don't even have a full-time staff member. They often share a legislative aide. So imagine having a day job, being a part-time legislator, and you get a phone call from the President of the United States. You get an in-person visit from the Vice President of the United States. You got the Speaker of the House in Washington working the phones. That pressure is enormous, and they said no. It's an extraordinary thing.
It's an extraordinary thing because that doesn't usually happen. People don't buck up against Donald Trump from within his own party the way that they should. And so it was it was very shocking that they actually said, no, we're not going to do this. And later on in the podcast, I would describe more about how the Indiana state legislature was voting when they were deciding to draw 2 additional Republican-leaning congressional districts. They basically were like, we can't do it. Like, we're thinking about doing it. We feel the pressure to do it. But basically, Donald Trump chose incorrectly when he decided to pressure them. They sent J.D. Vance in there. Donald Trump basically was threatening people with primaries. And one of the things that I saw was a number of the representatives basically saying, he's really rude. And we don't like him. The way he's acting is very disrespectful, and he should change his tone a little bit. I was like, not y'all bucking up at the way the man is speaking. All these other things you could have been upset about, but this what just going to do it for you? That's okay. That's fine. One of the representatives got very offended because Donald Trump used the R word. Now, it's funny for me to call it the R word because when I was a kid, this was a word that we use all the time. Oh, I shouldn't say it's funny. It's weird. It's weird for me to call it the R word because as a kid, we use this word all the time on the playground, which is probably why we no longer saying it. But one of the state representatives has a child with special needs. And when Donald Trump used the R word to describe Governor Tim Walz's child, who also has special needs, the Republican in Indiana was like, he's using slurs against people with special needs. I have a child with special needs. I can't tolerate this. And I'm like, you know what? There are 50 million other things that you could have decided were going to cause you to buck up against Donald Trump, but you know how we know how y'all operate. So maybe this is what it had to be. Godspeed and God bless. Whatever it's going to take is what it takes. Moving into international relations right now, and this is very important because in addition to the fact that we learned that yesterday the federal government was not able to get another indictment as against Letitia James, which I think is hilarious. They are now 0 for 3. They have tried 3 times to come up against Letitia James, and every single time they have had their asses handed to them. And so while we can celebrate that happening here in these United States, internationally, you also need to be aware as to what's happening. The U.S. has been threatening the International Criminal Court with sanctions unless the court promises not to prosecute Donald Trump. Again, with the projection, we know that it's a problem when you want them to change the rules about who you're able to prosecute. If you ain't done nothing wrong, you ain't got to worry about no rules. You ain't got to lie. You ain't got to worry about these things, but they are very, very concerned. According to Reuters, quote, President Donald Trump's administration wants the International Criminal Court to amend its founding document to ensure it does not investigate the Republican president and his top officials. He's basically trying to secure a pardon before he gets out of office. And this is according to a Trump administration official. They are threatening new sanctions on the court if they don't change those rules. If the court does not act on the U.S. demand, in addition to 2 others, which includes dropping investigations of Israeli leaders over the Gaza war and formally ending an earlier probe of U.S. troops over their actions in Afghanistan, then Washington is basically going to penalize International Criminal Court officials and could basically sanction the court itself. Reuters goes on to say that sanctioning the court would, quote, significantly escalate the U.S. campaign against the ICC, which has long been criticized by U.S. officials, including both Republicans and Democrats, who say the court infringes on U.S. sovereignty. U.S. sovereignty to do what? Steal oil tankers in the middle of the ocean? U.S. sovereignty to do what? Bomb innocent fisher people out the sky and basically murder people that you have no evidence of any wrongdoing whatsoever? According to the administration official who was speaking anonymously, he said, quote, Washington has communicated its demands to ICC members, some of whom are U.S. allies, and have also made them known to the court. The United States is not a party to the Rome Statute that established the ICC in 2002 as a court of last resort. So basically the Donald Trump administration is saying, we know we did some fugazi ass shit. We know technically y'all have a right to come and prosecute us, so you're going to have to change the rules to make it so that you don't have a right to come prosecute us anymore. They're basically saying to the principle of the world, we are the biggest bully on the block, and what you're going to have to do is stop applying them rules as against us. You're going to have to stop applying them rules. Now, the ICC judges have already issued arrest warrants for Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, former Israeli Defense Chief Yoav Gallant, and Hamas leader Ibrahim al-Masri last November for war crimes and crimes against humanity during this most recent war in Gaza and in Palestine. And in 2020, prosecutors had also opened up an investigation in Afghanistan looking at some of the nasty-ass shit that American troops were doing while they were over there. And they have been looking into the role of the United States. They haven't prioritized it, but now that the Trump administration is like, what you're going to have to do is change the rules because we should not be subjected to any sort of thing in the world. I'm just going to say, rest of the world, y'all gonna have to figure some shit out. It's kind of like being on the playground when you got a big ass bully who's got a little bitty gang, but y'all got way more of y'all than the bully has with them. I am here. I don't want nobody going to war. I ain't saying somebody should be bombing shit. Certainly the Americans shouldn't be. All I'm saying is to the rest of the world, y'all gonna have to figure some things out. What y'all gonna do to the bully? You're gonna have to figure it out for the sake of the schoolyard. For the sake of the world, you're going to have to figure it out because they are very concerned that the ICC is now going to be targeting them because what they are crystal clear about is the stuff they've been doing is wrong as hell and in violation of international rules. So this is a real tell. Another tell. We're going to talk more about this on the other side of the commercial break. Kilmar Abrego Garcia is a free man. I mean, he's still dealing with prosecution, but basically he has been released from prison. The federal judge has denied ICE from being able to re-detain him as they continue to work through the case as against him. And that is a real significant tell that their entire way in which the Homeland Security has been executing these warrants, has been executing these deportations, these abscondments, I guess. I don't even know if that's a word. Absconding people is completely in violation of not just American law, but international law as well. And that is something that everybody in the administration needs to be concerned about because even though the Supreme Court gave Donald Trump immunity, that only works here in these United States. The rest of the world ain't give your ass immunity. And ain't nobody else in the Trump administration got any of that immunity, which lets us know they all got a lot to worry about. So anticipate them cheating their way into the next election because they are scared to death that if they lose, they are going to jail. YouTube, we appreciate you. Urban View will be back.